I do.
State your name, please.
My name is Letitia Ann Peplau,
And spell your last name.
L-A-U.
And your first name.
Letitia, L-E-T-I-T-I-A.
Thank you. I was just going to
Yeah.
this microphone closer to you.
Is that better?
And for the record, my name is Christopher Dussault, Gibson, Dun & Crutcher for the plaintiffs.
Very well. Go forward, Mr. Dussault.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Peplau.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Peplau, what is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from Brown University and a PhD in social psychology from Harvard University.
What is social psychology?
Social psychology is the sub-branch within psychology that studies human relationships, human groups, social influence, basically the relationships among people.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles.
When did you join the faculty at UCLA?
I joined the faculty in 1973.
And are you tenured?
Yes,
When did you become tenured?
in 1982.
What is your position within the psychology department?
I'm a professor of psychology, and I'm also the vice chair for graduate studies in psychology.
And what is the general reputation of UCLA's psychology graduate department?
It's a very respected department, and we're ranked in the top 5 nationwide.
Dr. Peplau, do you lead any programs at UCLA?
I do. I am the director of the UCLA Interdisciplinary Relationship Science Program. It's a graduate training program funded by the National Science Foundation.
And in what does it train people?
It trains doctoral students from several disciplines who want to specialize in studying social relationships. That can include family relationships, marriage, friendship, as well as same-sex relationships.
Have you received any professional honors for your work?
I have. I've received a number of Lifetime Achievement or Scientific Contribution Awards. One is from the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality, and several of them are from different divisions of the American Psychological Association.
And have you served as president of any societies?
Yes, I was elected president of the International Association for Relationship Research.
In the course of your professional work in social psychology, has your study focused on any particular topics?
Focused on 3 interrelated topics: close personal relationships, sexual orientation, and gender.
Have you conducted research on heterosexual couples
Yes, I have.
and also on same-sex couples?
Yes.
And in studying relationships, have you looked at marriage?
I have primarily looked at relationships other than marriage, but I have done some studies that have involved marriage, yes.
Do you study the relationships of lesbian and gay men?
Yes, I do.
When did you begin doing that?
I began studying same-sex couples in the early 1970s. At that time, there was very little research in the area, and I was one of the first psychologists to do that research. Today, of course, there are many more people studying same-sex relationships, and the field has grown substantially.
Have you authored any books?
I've written or co-authored about 10 books.
And on what subjects?
Some have been general topics in psychology, introductory psychology, social psychology. Others have been professional level books. One is on close relationships, another on loneliness. I edited a book on gender, culture, and ethnicity. I've edited a volume on same-sex couples and another volume on women's sexuality.
Have you written articles?
Yes, I've written, probably 120 journal articles and chapters for scholarly books.
Are your articles generally published in peer-reviewed journals?
I believe all of them have been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals.
And have you done reviews of other scholars' work?
Yes, I've written what I would call literature reviews, that is, chapters for edited books in which I've reviewed the current state of research and theory on a particular topic.
Your Honor, I would, actually, if I may direct the witness to Plaintiff's Exhibit 2329. Just to be clear, the way we have the witness binder organized, Your Honor, is certain exhibits that will be introduced individually are in the front. Then there's an A, B, and C tab at the bottom for certain exhibits that will be introduced collectively. So if we could look at 2329. Dr. Peplau.
I'm not finding that in this binder.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Perhaps you can guide us both through. I'm having the same problem.
Oh, are you?
Actually, I think I just found it, and it's just prior to tab A.
I see. All right. Numerical order is a wonderful thing.
Understood, Your Honor. Dr. Peplau, is that a true and correct copy of your CV?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I would submit Exhibit 2329 into evidence.
No objection.
Very well.
And Your Honor, we would tender Professor Peplau as an expert on couple relationships within the field of social psychology.
Any voir dire?
No, Your Honor, no objection.
Very well. You may proceed, Mr. Dussault.
Dr. Peplau, do you intend to offer opinions today in this case?
Yes, I will be offering 4 opinions.
What are those?
My first opinion is that for those adults who choose to enter into marriage, that marriage is often associated with many important benefits. I will also offer the opinion that research examining the relationships of gay and lesbian couples has found remarkable similarities between the research of same-sex couples and heterosexual couples. I will offer the opinion that when same-sex couples are permitted to enter into civil marriage, that they will likely have the same benefits from marriage that heterosexuals do. And fourth, I'll offer the opinion that permitting same-sex civil marriage will not be harmful to heterosexual marriage.
Dr. Peplau, let's start with the first opinion that you mentioned. Have there been research and studies into how Americans feel about marriage?
Americans are very enthusiastic about marriage. Most Americans view marriage as one of the most important relationships in their life. Many people view getting married as a very important life goal. And when researchers have surveyed Americans and asked their opinions about marriage, they find a similar pattern. For example, a recent Gallup opinion poll asked a representative sample of Americans about marriage, and 91% of those people reported that they either have been married or plan to get married at some time in the future.
Is there any evidence of which you're aware that lesbians and gay men feel the same way about marriage as heterosexuals?
Yes, of course, in most states, asking lesbians and gay men about marriage is a hypothetical question, but that question has been asked. In a recent survey conducted by the Kaiser Family Foundation, the question asked was, if you were able to legally marry someone of the same sex, would you like to do so at some time in your life? And the majority of lesbians and gay men, 74%, said that yes, indeed, they would like to get married if they had that option.
And turn, if you would, in your binder to Plaintiff's Exhibit 938, and this is in the first section before the tab A. And Dr. Peplau, is this the study that you were just referring to?
Yes, it is.
And this is something that you've relied on in reaching your opinions?
Yes, this is the Kaiser Family Foundation study of lesbians and gay men.
Your Honor, we would submit Plaintiff's Exhibit 938 into evidence.
No objection.
Very well, 938 is admitted.
Dr. Peplau, are you aware of any research on the subject of whether people in this country value domestic partnerships to the same extent as they value marriage?
Researchers have been interested in whether lesbians and gay men would prefer to get married or would prefer other options such as civil unions or registered partnerships. Evidence on this point comes from research done by Gary Gates, Lee Badgett, and others. And what these researchers did was to ask the question, we now have several states that have options for civil unions or registered partnerships. And they asked the question across all of those states that permit that, in the first year, what percent of same-sex cohabiting couples in the state actually took advantage of that option? And then they asked in Massachusetts, where marriage is the option, in the first year that marriage was available to same-sex couples, what percent got married? And what they found was that whereas across the states that permit civil unions and partnerships, about 10 to 12% of couples in the first year took that option. In contrast, in Massachusetts, when marriage became available, something like 37% of the couples got married, suggesting that couples were 3 times more likely to get married than to enter into one of these other quasi-marital options.
Dr. Peplau, if you could turn to tab 909, which is in the front section before tab A of your binder. And is this the Gates, Badgett, and Ho study that you referred to?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, plaintiffs would move Exhibit 909 into evidence.
No objection.
Very well, 909 is admitted.
Are you aware of research regarding the impact of marriage, if any, on health?
There is a very large body of research on the impact for heterosexuals of marriage on health. These are studies that have compared the health of married individuals to the health of other adults who are not married. And the very consistent findings from those research are that on average, married individuals fare better. They're physically healthier, they tend to live longer, they engage in fewer risky behaviors, they look better on measures of psychological well-being.
Are you aware of any recent studies of particular note that document the health benefits associated with marriage?
Yes, one of the recent studies on that is a government study conducted by researchers at the Centers for Disease Control. And what they did was to interview a representative sample of Americans, a very large sample, more than 100,000 people, and to do these comparisons between married individuals and other individuals on a range of questions about health. And what they found was that if you control for age and for income and education, for a few things like that, for race, that across all of these groups, the married individuals did better on virtually every measure. So the married couples reported fewer health problems. They were less likely to indicate that their daily activities at home or at work were restricted because of a physical ailment of some sort. They were less likely to smoke. They were less likely to drink in excess. They were less likely to report headaches and migraines. We could go on, but the consistent pattern was that on average, the married couples were better in terms of health.
And does the research tell us anything about why marriage is associated with health benefits?
That's certainly been an important question for researchers, and there are 2 main explanations that have been considered. One is what's been called a selection effect. And the idea here is that perhaps people who are healthier to start out with are more likely to be able to attract a partner, to get married, and maybe because of their health and mental health as well. They're better able to maintain a satisfying relationship. So that would be a selection effect. The second hypothesis, or a second explanation, is what's been called a protection effect. And that's the idea that there are things associated with marriage that actually enhance and contribute to health. Things that people didn't bring into the relationship that they experience as a result of being married. And research pretty clearly demonstrates that the selection effect is only a partial answer, that there does definitely appear to be a protective effect for many couples, from individuals in many couples, of being married.
Can you explain to us why marriage might be associated with what you describe as protective effects?
Yes, I think there would be at least 4 reasons for that. One is that for many people, getting married reflects a change in identity. That when psychologists sometimes ask people to describe who are you, and if you ask me, I might say I'm a wife, I'm a psychologist, I'm an American, and I would be indicating important identities that I valued and that were part of who I am as a person. And for many people, marriage is one of these identities. So it is, I said earlier, it's an important life goal. Achieving that life goal can lead people to feel good about themselves, can enhance their self-esteem. Marriage is a valued status in society, so being part of that institution can make you feel good about yourself. As well, part of being married may mean, now I'm an adult, now I really need to be a kind of mature, responsible person. And maybe that would lead us to take better care of ourselves. Or maybe we'll feel more responsible for our spouse and say, well, you know, I'm not just in it for me, I'm in it for my partner as well, so perhaps I ought to give up rock climbing and be more careful about how much I drink. So these would be ways in which marriage, the status of being married, might affect the individual. A second thing is that marriage is about a relationship between two people, and there are often important ways in which spouses support each other, help each other, try to encourage each other to lead healthy lifestyles. And so this kind of support from another person can enhance your health. So we talked about the individual and then the couple. There's also a broader social network that when people get married, they develop relationships not only with their partner, but also with an extended family, with kin, that marriage links two families, so that if prior to marriage each person had relatives who cared about them and friends, now they may have two networks and two groups of people who are there as resources to them, who can help them through tough times. And so this connection to an extended community and family network can be helpful to people's health. And finally, marriage can also lead to various kinds of supports from government to beneficial laws, or being eligible for programs, or for health insurance through an employer, or a slew of things that can also contribute to health and well-being. Now, of course, this doesn't happen automatically in every marriage. These are things that happen in good marriages. Some marriages are conflict-ridden and miserable and don't confer those benefits. But on average, marriage does seem to be associated with benefits, and I think for many good reasons.
Dr. Peplau, if you could turn to your exhibit binder, and now turning to tab A. There is a series of exhibits here that I've grouped together, and I'll read the numbers into the record. They are Plaintiff's Exhibit 781, 913, 937, 964, 1043, 1171, 1173, 1250, 1254, and 1474. Do you see those?
I do. I don't think they're all in the order you read them in.
Are we behind tab A?
I thought so, yeah. As I look through them, these are all articles that are relevant to the issue of the benefits of marriage.
And are these articles that you've relied on in forming your opinions that you've testified to today about the benefits of marriage?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, I would move those exhibits into evidence.
If I could have just 1 minute to flip through the binder.
Certainly.
No objection, Your Honor.
Very well, I won't read the entire list, but those exhibits are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Peplow, let's talk about the second opinion that you mentioned when you were beginning your testimony regarding similarity between opposite sex and same-sex relationships. Has social science research been done that compares same-sex relationships and heterosexual relationships?
Yes, there have been quite a number of studies that include samples of both same-sex and heterosexual couples and that compare them in a variety of systematic ways.
And has that body of work been well received within your field?
Yes, it has. It's been published in peer-reviewed journals. It's been presented at major scientific meetings and so on.
What are the primary topics of study in this body of work?
One major topic has been to examine the quality of same-sex relationships and to ask how similar or different it is to the quality of heterosexual relationships. A second major topic has been to look at the stability of relationships, their durability over time. And then a third major topic has been to look at the processes or the dynamics that affect relationships, to ask questions about whether the quality and the stability of same-sex couples' relationships are influenced by the same kinds of factors that apply in heterosexual couples.
And I'd like to ask you about each of those individually, but first let me ask you, does this research as a whole show whether there is or is not a similarity generally between same-sex and opposite-sex relationships?
One of the striking things about this research is the consistency of findings across different studies conducted by different researchers using somewhat different methodologies. And the consistent finding is one of great similarity across couples, both same-sex and heterosexual.
Now, the first topic that you mentioned was the quality of relationships. Has research been done examining and comparing the overall quality of same-sex and opposite-sex relationships?
Yes, and let me just say for a moment what I mean by quality, because researchers have tried to study quality or to measure it in a variety of different ways. Researchers have developed standardized measures of relationship adjustment. We've developed standardized measures of love, of commitment, of feelings of closeness in relationship. These are multiple item standardized measures. In addition, researchers have also conducted observational studies in which they bring couples into the laboratory and ask them to talk with each other about an assigned topic while they're being videotaped. And then the researchers systematically code those interactions and ask questions like, how much warmth does the couple express toward each other? Do they express sarcasm? What's the quality of their interaction? So I want to emphasize that a lot of different methods have been used to assess quality, and regardless of how it's measured, the consistent finding time and again has been that on average same-sex couples and heterosexual couples are indistinguishable. That does not mean that all couples are enormously happy. It means there's some happy couples, some okay couples, and some not so happy couples in all groups. But on average, the level of quality is the same.
Peplow, have you ever heard a view or stereotype expressed that same-sex couples are somehow generally unhappy or dissatisfied?
Yes, I think a common stereotype has been, there have been several pieces to it. One, that gay men and lesbians have trouble forming relationships, that if they do form relationships, they're kind of unstable, they don't last very long, and that maybe the quality of those relationships is inferior to the quality of heterosexual relationships.
And is there any support in your field that you have seen for that stereotype of the relationship?
None at all.
You also mentioned the stability of relationships. Has research been done comparing the stability of same-sex and opposite-sex relationships?
Yes, it has.
What has that shown?
The stability of a relationship refers to how long the relationship lasts over time. For married couples, we have government statistics that tell us when couples marry and when they divorce or when the relationship is dissolved in various ways. So we have pretty good national data sets about heterosexual marriages and their length. We do not have comparable data for same-sex couples. Nonetheless, researchers have been able to rely on large-scale surveys, some of them now representative surveys, that address this question and that have really provided evidence that a substantial proportion of lesbians and gay men are in relationships, that many of those relationships are long-term.
Are there any examples of studies that have shown that lesbians and gay men are in fact able to form committed, long-lasting relationships?
I think one of the best studies is a study by Carpenter and Gates that was published in Demography, the leading journal for demographers. What these researchers did was to analyze data from a survey conducted in California of a representative sample of lesbians and gay men in the state. And one of the questions that was asked on that survey was, are you currently in a cohabiting relationship with a same-sex partner? And what the researchers found was that 61% of the lesbian respondents said yes, they were living with another woman in a loving relationship. And about 46% of the gay men said that they were currently in a cohabiting relationship. And just for comparison, the researchers mentioned that if you looked in the same age range of 18 to 59 at heterosexuals, you would find that about 62% of heterosexuals were either married or cohabiting. So the percent for heterosexuals and for lesbians was essentially the same, and for gay men it wasn't terribly different.
And did that study also look at whether gay men and lesbians are typically able to form long-lasting relationships?
Yes, another question that was asked was, how long has your current cohabiting relationship been going on? And what the researchers found was that on average, these relationships had lasted about 8 to 10 years. Now, to put that in context, the average person who was part of this survey was about 41 years old. So if you think they're 41 now, their relationship's been going on, say, for 10 years. They were 31 when the relationship began. I think that indicates that these are people who, early in adulthood, found a partner, established a relationship, and for the bulk of their young adulthood, that they were with the same partner. So I think this survey provides compelling evidence both that many lesbians and gay men are in relationships and that at least some of those relationships are of quite long duration.
Now, to your knowledge, are there any professional organizations that have weighed in on the subject of whether lesbians and gay men can and do form committed relationships?
Yes, my own organization, the American Psychological Association, the largest association in the world of professional psychologists, has recently adopted a position paper, a resolution on that topic.
And turn, if you would, Dr. Peplau, to Exhibit 765 in your binder, which is the second exhibit from the front. Is this the document that you're referring to?
Yes, it is. It's the APA Policy Statement on Sexual Orientation and Marriage, and it was adopted by the APA Council of Representatives in July 2004.
Your Honor, we would offer Plaintiff's Exhibit 765 into evidence.
765 is admitted.
You could put the first demonstrative on the screen here. And Dr. Peplau, is this one of the findings from the study that you're referencing, that many lesbians and gay men have formed durable relationships?
Yes, it is.
And could we turn to the second slide here? And is it also one of the findings, Dr. Peplau, that the factors that predict relationship satisfaction, relationship commitment, and relationship stability are remarkably similar for both same-sex cohabitating couples and heterosexual married couples?
Yes.
Now, is there some evidence that on average cohabitating gay and lesbian relationships are of slightly shorter duration?
As I mentioned before, we don't have directly comparable information, but there is some suggestion that might be the case.
Do you have any explanation for that?
Well, I think if there are several possible explanations. One is that because the data aren't directly comparable, married couples may be a group that's more selected for high levels of commitment and intentions to stay together for a long time. Cohabiting couples, in contrast, may be a more diverse group of people, some of whom feel great levels of commitment and others of whom don't. So it's a comparison that may, to some extent, be mixing apples and oranges. But I think there are several other reasons as well. One is that gay men and lesbians don't have the benefits of marriage, and that marriage is, for many relationships, a stabilizing influence. And we've talked about, and we'll talk more about, why that may be the case. Another reason may be that sexual orientation, being gay or lesbian, is still a stigmatized identity in the United States. And so there may be ways in which stigma and prejudice and discrimination take a toll on the relationships of lesbians and gay men.
And the testimony. Are you saying that there is a difference in durability of relationships among cohabiting heterosexuals from married heterosexuals?
That's true, but the comparison I meant to be giving was between same-sex cohabiting or not cohabiting couples and married heterosexuals. I was really trying to do a comparison between same-sex couples and heterosexual couples. And what I was saying was that we have a very clear idea of who those heterosexual couples are because they're typically married couples, but that the same-sex couples can be a more mixed group.
What do the data show with respect to differences, if any, between married couples, presumably heterosexual couples, and cohabitating heterosexual couples? Is there a difference in the durability of those two relationships?
Yes, there is. On average, and again, we're talking about gross averages, but on average, heterosexual cohabiting relationships are of shorter duration than heterosexual marriages.
Dr. Peplau, you referenced earlier the issue of processes in relationships. Has research been done into whether the same processes are at work in the relationships of same-sex couples on the one hand and opposite-sex couples on the other?
Yes, it has, and let me just give one example of what I mean by a process. One of the things researchers have studied is what factors determine the quality or the level of satisfaction in a relationship, and obviously an important factor would be arguments or conflict between the partners. And so researchers have examined the extent to which same-sex and heterosexual couples have the same frequency of arguing, which they do, to the extent to which they may be arguing about similar sorts of things, and the answer is yes. The extent to which they may try to work out their disagreements to negotiate in similar ways, and the answer is that they do. And then the process question is the relationship between high levels of conflict and low satisfaction the same for both types of couples? And the answer there is that yes, it is, that level of conflict influences the quality of both kinds of relationships.
And now looking at the three factors that you've mentioned together, quality, stability, and the sameness of processes that affect those factors, is there a consensus in the research as to whether these factors are similar between same-sex and opposite-sex couples.
Yes, the overwhelming finding and the consensus of professionals in the field is of similarity across these two types of couples.
What I'd like to do now is just move into the record a group of documents that are behind tab B that support Dr. Peplau's opinion about the similarities between opposite-sex and same-sex relationships. These are the documents found at tab B. And for the record, they are plaintiff's exhibits 921, 942, 1050, 1054, 1130, 1137, 1142, 1144, 1150, 1166, 1231,
1156?
1166, Your Honor.
66.
1231, 1234, 1236, and 1245. So, Your Honor, plaintiffs would submit those documents into evidence.
Hearing no objection,
Your Honor, if I could just have a moment.
Absolutely.
The tab.
of course. Well, thank you, Ms. Moss. Proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Peplau, let's talk about the third opinion that you mentioned at the beginning of your testimony. Do you have an opinion as to whether gay and lesbian individuals would benefit from marriage?
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
Opinion based on the great similarities that have been documented between same-sex couples and heterosexual couples is that if same-sex couples were permitted to marry, that they also would enjoy the same benefits.
Now, to your knowledge, have any professional organizations come to the same conclusion?
Yes, the American Psychiatric Association, which is the national organization of physician psychiatrists, medical experts who study mental health and illness, have issued a policy statement on that.
If I could, Dr. Peplau, direct your attention to Plaintiff's Exhibit 787, which is the third exhibit from the front of your binder. Is this the policy statement of the American Psychiatric Association that you referenced just a moment ago?
Yes, it is. And I would just note that it was approved by their assembly and also approved by the Board of Trustees. So it went through a vetting process in the professional organization, and that happened in 2005.
Your Honor, plaintiffs would submit Exhibit 787 into evidence?
No objection.
787 is admitted.
Peplau, we've highlighted a statement from this policy statement of the American Psychiatric Association. Could you please read the highlighted portion?
Sure. It says, in the interest of maintaining and promoting mental health, the American Psychiatric Association supports the legal recognition of same-sex civil marriage with all rights, benefits, and responsibilities conferred by civil marriage, and opposes restrictions to those same rights, benefits, and responsibilities.
Now, Dr. Peplau, have there been any empirical studies on the effects of marriage on American gay and lesbian individuals who choose to marry and are able to?
Let me just step back and say that my strong belief that same-sex couples would benefit from civil marriage is based primarily on the large body of research about heterosexuals benefiting from marriage and the body of research about similarities and differences. Based on that, I would predict that in states in the United States that permit same-sex marriage, that we would not see any change either in the rate of people getting married or in the rate of people getting divorced. And in order to look at that prediction, I went to the government website that provides statistics, federal statistics, on the annual rates for marriage and for divorce in Massachusetts. And I looked at the 4 years prior to same-sex marriage being legal and the 4 years after. And in what I was looking at there was, has there been a change in the rates of marriage or of divorce associated with the introduction of civil same-sex marriage? And what's very clear from those data is that there has been no change, that the rates of marriage and divorce are no different after civil marriage was permitted than they were before.
Dr. Peplau, if I could direct your attention to Exhibit 959 in the front section of your binder.
9. I'm having trouble finding it.
If it's the 9th tab from the front.
959. I apologize, but I'm not finding it.
$9.59? I have it.
959? You do. Your Honor, may I approach the witness and show her mine?
By all means. By all means.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Peplau, is Exhibit 959 the study that you're referring to that you looked at about results where couples have been permitted to marry, same-sex couples have been permitted to marry?
What I was referring to before were government statistics about rates of marriage and divorce. One of the other things that I would predict would be that if we surveyed individuals who have gotten married in civil same-sex marriages in Massachusetts, that they would report benefiting from that. And there is one study that addresses that issue. This is a study by Ramos and others. They used data that was collected by the Massachusetts Department of Health. The Department of Health was very interested in trying to understand what some of the impact might have been of marriage for same-sex couples in their state. And so I believe 4 years after marriage was permitted, they conducted a survey. It was not a representative sample, but it was a sample that included over 500 lesbians and gay men who had been married in Massachusetts. And the survey asked those individuals questions about why they had gotten married, whether they thought that marriage had improved their lives in a variety of ways. And for those individuals who were raising children, they also asked people's beliefs about how the marriage had affected the children.
And what did that study show as to the effects of access to marriage on same-sex couples?
One of the things the researchers found, I think, is not at all surprising, and that is that after they got married, many of the couples said they felt more committed to each other. I think heterosexual newlyweds might well say the same thing. But there were other things that the couples said that I think are particularly noteworthy. Many of the married lesbians and gay men said that they believed that their families were now more approving of their relationship. Many of them said that they felt less worried about legal problems. And a third of them said that either they or their spouse now had access to health benefits from an employer that they had not had before getting married. And so they were reporting a number of benefits. And for those couples who had children, and as I think I mentioned, that was about 25% of the respondents in this survey, they overwhelmingly reported that marriage had been beneficial to the children. 95% of them said that they thought the children had benefited from the fact that they were now married.
Your Honor, plaintiffs would move into Evidence Exhibit 959.
No objection.
9.5 is admitted.
So Dr. Peplau, was it your conclusion that this study of Massachusetts supported the opinions that you drew through your other research as to potential benefits of marriage
Yes,
for same-sex couples?
yes.
So then let's turn from the benefits of marriage for same-sex couples to the fourth opinion that you said that you wish to offer today, which is the question of whether allowing same-sex marriages would harm heterosexual marriages. Do you, Dr. Peplau, have an opinion as to whether allowing gay and lesbian couples to marry would in any way affect the stability of heterosexual marriages?
I do have an opinion, and it is that I think it would have no impact on the stability of heterosexual marriages.
Why is that?
Well, we might say that by stability we really mean two things. One would be, is it going to affect entry into marriage? So are fewer heterosexuals going to decide to marry because same-sex couples can marry? And then the other would be exit from marriage. Are we going to see an increase in divorce?
Well, let's start with entry.
Okay.
Based on your work in this field and the study of relationships, do you see any basis for an argument that allowing same-sex couples to marry would lead fewer heterosexual couples to enter into marriage?
No, I don't. I think we have a large literature that tells us some of the many reasons why people get married. Many of them have to do with the fact that they are in love with someone, that they want to establish a life together, that they've been planning to get married since they were young children, and this has been a life goal. These are things about their relationship. They're things about a special other person. And there is nothing that I am aware of in the way of data or theory that would suggest that same-sex civil marriage will lead fewer heterosexuals to marry.
So let's turn to the second part of the equation as you described it. Is there any basis in your years of study for the concept that allowing same-sex couples to marry would lead more married heterosexual couples to exit or divorce from their marriages?
I can think of no reason. That is, it's just very hard for me to imagine that you would have a happily married couple who would say, Gertrude, we've been married for 30 years, but I think we have to throw in the towel because Adam and Stuart down the block got married. We know a lot about factors that lead relationships to fall apart. The immediate cause is usually that the couples are having conflict, they're arguing, the relationship has gone sour. If they're not arguing, it feels empty. They feel that their needs are not being met in the relationship. There are very personal reasons for getting divorced. We also know some of the people who are at greatest risk for divorce, people with low levels of education, people who are poor, whose relationships are under great stress and may not have the resources to meet those stress. Nothing that we know about all of these kinds of factors that lead to divorce has anything to do with civil rights for same-sex couples.
Now, there's obviously been some argument and evidence around this issue about exposure to marriage. Do you have an understanding of what percentage or even roughly what proportion of married couples in America would be same-sex couples if same-sex couples were permitted to marry?
My estimate would be that if same-sex couples were permitted to marry, that perhaps 2% of couples, 1 to 2 to 3%. Some very small percentage would be same-sex couples.
And to be clear on what you mean 1 to 3% of all married
Of
couples?
all
would-
married couples,
would be
absolutely.
same-sex.
Thank you.
Now, also, do you have, let me make sure I understand. If same-sex couples are permitted to marry, then presumably there would be more married couples in the country or in California than otherwise, correct?
That's correct.
Now, do you have a view as to whether that would have any impact one way or another on marriage?
Well, usually we see it as a sign of the health of an institution like marriage, or really of any institution, if more people want to join. One of the things that has worried some people about heterosexual marriage is that fewer people are getting married and more of them are getting divorced. So the idea that there's a group of American citizens who want to enter this institution, to keep it going, to keep it vibrant and alive, from my perspective, seems like a very good omen for the future of America.
Dr. Peplau, have any professional organizations commented on whether keeping marriage as exclusively a man-woman union is essential to avoiding some sort of harm to our society?
Yes, I think, the group that's best, the professional group that's best able to comment on that are anthropologists, professionals trained to study varying patterns across time and place in culture. And there's a large group of anthropologists who study kinship, family, and so on. And the professional organization of anthropologists, the American Anthropological Association, has taken a position on this issue.
Turn, if you would, Dr. Peplau, to the very first exhibit in your binder, which I'm hoping is 754.
Yes.
Is this the statement of the American Anthropological Association that you just referenced?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, plaintiffs would submit Exhibit 754 into evidence?
No objection.
Very well.
And as we did with some of the earlier statements, we've called out some of the language. Could you read that into the record?
Sure. The results of more than a century of anthropological research on households, kinship relationships, and families across cultures and through time provide no support whatsoever for the view that either civilization or viable social orders depend upon marriage as an exclusively heterosexual institution. Rather, anthropological research supports the conclusion that a vast array of family types, including families built upon same-sex partnerships, can contribute to stable and humane societies.
Now, Dr. Peplau, I may have gotten you into this issue a little earlier accidentally. Is there empirical evidence in the United States that you're aware of on the issue of whether same-sex marriages have any adverse impact on the lasting stability of heterosexual marriages?
I think we talked a bit earlier about data from Massachusetts about whether the change permitting same-sex couples to marry in Massachusetts had led either to an increase in the divorce rate or a decrease in the rate of people getting married. And I would see those data showing no difference before and after same-sex marriage as very consistent with the argument that we would not expect harm.
And, Your Honor, plaintiffs would move into evidence the exhibits that are found at tab C of the binder, which are plaintiffs' exhibits 1145, 1151, and 1195.
What was the second one you mentioned?
1145, 1151,
Thank you.
95.
No objection.
And Dr. Peplau, are those,
Very well. Those exhibits will be admitted. Proceed.
Dr. Peplau, are those documents materials that you have relied on in reaching your view, the fourth opinion you offered, that allowing same-sex marriages would not harm heterosexual marriage?
Yes, they are.
Thank you very much. I have nothing further.
Very well, Ms. Moss, you may cross-examine.